Welcome to Paranormal Pages. Let's get straight into the True Scary Stories compilation. Story 1. The Closet Warning. The night was quiet, the only sound the soft rustle of leaves outside my bedroom window. I lay in bed, my eyes heavy with exhaustion as I tried to drift off to sleep. But no matter how hard I tried, the sense of unease that had settled over me refused to be ignored. I glanced towards the closet, where my dog, Max, lay curled up on the floor, his eyes fixed on the closed door as he growled softly under his breath. It had become a nightly ritual, the growling, the barking, the frantic scratching at the door as if he were trying to warn me of some unseen danger lurking within. I sighed and turned away, trying to ignore the sense of dread that gnawed at the edges of my consciousness. Max had always been a nervous dog, prone to barking at shadows and imaginary threats. But lately, his behavior had grown more erratic, more frantic, as if he sensed something that I could not. I tried to push the thought from my mind, to tell myself that it was just my imagination running wild in the darkness of the night. But deep down, I knew that something was terribly wrong, that Max's warnings were not to be ignored. And then, just as I was about to drift off to sleep, I heard it, the sound of scratching at the closet door, followed by a low, guttural growl that sent shivers down my spine. I sat up, my heart pounding in my chest as I listened to the sound, trying to make sense of the noise that echoed through the silent darkness. I glanced towards the closet, my pulse quickening as I saw Max standing before it, his hackles raised and his teeth bared in a silent snarl. He barked once, twice, 3 times, his voice filled with a sense of urgency that sent a chill racing down my spine. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the closet door as I debated whether to heed Max's warnings or dismiss them as the product of an overactive imagination. But deep down, I knew that I could not ignore the sense of unease that had settled over me, that I had to confront whatever lay within the closet. With a trembling hand, I reached for the door handle and pulled it open, the hinges creaking softly in protest as the door swung inward to reveal the darkness beyond. I hesitated for a moment, my heart pounding in my chest as I stared into the depths of the closet, half expecting to see some monstrous creature lurking within. But to my surprise, the closet was empty, the darkness swallowing the space like a gaping maw. I frowned in confusion, my mind racing as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. Had Max been barking at nothing all along? Or was there something else at play, something beyond my understanding? I stepped forward, my senses on high alert as I searched the closet for any sign of what could have caused Max's agitation. And then, just as I was about to give up hope, I saw it. A glint of light caught my eye, drawing my attention to a small object lying on the floor of the closet. I knelt down and picked it up, my hands trembling as I realized what it was, an old photograph of myself, taken when I was just a child. I frowned as I studied the image, a sense of unease settling over me as I noticed the words written on the back in faded ink, "Don't look behind you." My breath caught in my throat as I read the words, a chill racing down my spine as I realized the implications of what I had found. Who had left the photograph in my closet? And what did they mean by their ominous warning? I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone standing behind me, watching and waiting in the darkness. But there was nothing, only the empty silence of the night, broken only by the soft rustle of leaves outside the window. I stood there in the darkness, the weight of the photograph heavy in my hand as I tried to make sense of what I had found. But no matter how hard I tried, I could not shake the feeling that someone, or something, was watching me, lurking just out of sight in the shadows. I glanced towards the closet, a sense of dread pooling in the pit of my stomach as I realized that whatever had left the photograph behind could still be lurking within its depths. I reached out and closed the closet door, the sound of its latch clicking shut echoing through the empty room. I lay back down in bed, the events of the night replaying in my mind as I struggled to find sleep. And then, just as I felt myself drifting into slumber, I heard it, the sound of scratching at the closet door, followed by a low, guttural growl that sent shivers down my spine. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest as I listened to the sound, trying to make sense of the noise that echoed through the silent room. And then, just when I thought I could bear it no longer, the scratching stopped, replaced by a soft whisper that seeed to fill the room. "Don't look behind you," the voice whispered, its words sending a chill racing down my spine as I realized that I was not alone, that something was lurking in the dark. Story 2. Echoes of Sorrow. The night was still, the silence of our home broken only by the faint hum of the air conditioner. I lay in bed, my thoughts drifting as I struggled to find sleep in the oppressive darkness. And then, amidst the quiet, I heard it, the soft sound of someone crying. I sat up, my heart pounding in my chest as I strained to listen. The cries grew louder, more insistent, echoing through the empty halls of our home like a mournful lament. I glanced towards the bathroom, a sense of dread pooling in the pit of my stomach as I realized where the sound was coming from. I pushed back the covers and rose from bed, the floor cold beneath my bare feet as I made my way towards the bathroom door. The cries grew louder with each step, filling the air with a sense of sorrow that seemed to seep into my very bones. I reached for the door handle, my hand trembling as I pushed it open and stepped inside. And there, bathed in the soft glow of the nightlight, stood my wife, her shoulders shaking as she sobbed into her hands. My heart broke at the sight of her pain, and without hesitation, I crossed the room and wrapped my arms around her, pulling her close in a silent embrace. "What's wrong, honey?" I asked, my voice soft with concern. But she didn't respond, her sobs growing louder as she buried her face against my chest. I held her tighter, trying to offer what comfort I could in the face of her overwhelming grief. But even as I held her, a sense of unease settled over me, as if something were lurking in the shadows, watching and waiting. After what felt like an eternity, my wife's sobs began to subside, her breathing slowing as she drifted into an uneasy sleep. I watched over her for a moment, a sense of protectiveness swelling within me as I vowed to do whatever it took to keep her safe from whatever darkness haunted her dreams. I gently extricated myself from her embrace and made my way back to our bedroom. The darkness seemed to press in around me, suffocating and oppressive as I lay back down in bed, my thoughts swirling with 1,000 unanswered questions. I tried to find sleep in the silence of the night, but the memory of my wife's tears lingered like a specter in the darkness, haunting my every thought. And then, just as I felt myself drifting into slumber, I heard it, the sound of someone crying. My heart pounded in my chest as I sat up, the room bathed in the soft glow of the moonlight streaming through the window. I glanced towards the bathroom, a sense of dread knotting in the pit of my stomach as I realized that the cries were coming from there once again. I rose from bed, the floor cold beneath my feet as I made my way towards the bathroom door. The cries grew louder with each step, filling the air with a sense of sorrow that seemed to weigh me down like a leaden weight. I pushed open the door and stepped inside, my heart pounding in my chest as I prepared to face whatever horrors awaited me within. But to my surprise, the bathroom was empty, the only sound the faint trickle of water from the faucet. I frowned in confusion, my senses on high alert as I scanned the room for any sign of what could have caused the cries. But there was nothing, only the empty silence of the night, broken only by the soft hum of the air conditioner. And then, just as I was about to leave, I heard it, the sound of someone crying, echoing through the darkness like a mournful lament. I froze, my blood running cold as I realized that the cries were coming from behind me. I turned slowly, my heart pounding in my chest as I searched the darkness for the source of the cries. But there was nothing, only the empty room, bathed in the soft glow of the moonlight streaming through the window. I stepped forward, my senses on high alert as I scanned the room for any sign of what could be causing the cries. And then, just as I was about to give up hope, I saw it, a figure standing in the corner of the room, its form shrouded in shadow. I froze, my breath catching in my throat as I stared at the figure, unable to tear my eyes away from its dark and twisted form. It seemed to flicker in and out of existence, like a ghostly apparition that defied explanation. I tried to speak, to call out and demand answers, but no sound escaped my lips. I could only watch in terror as the figure drew closer, its movements slow and deliberate as it reached out towards me with gnarled and twisted hands. And then, just when I thought I could bear it no longer, the figure vanished, disappearing into the darkness as suddenly as it had appeared. I stood there, shaking and trembling, until the first light of dawn began to creep through the curtains. Hey! Subscribe for more true scary stories. Story 3. The Haunted Doll. I never believed in the supernatural until the doll entered our lives. It was a gift for my daughter's birthday, an innocent-looking toy with porcelain skin and glassy eyes that seemed to follow you wherever you went. At first, I dismissed it as a mere trinket, a plaything for a child's imagination. Little did I know, it would become the harbinger of terror that would haunt our home. It started small, subtle movements that could easily be attributed to gravity or the wind, a shift in position here, a tilt of the head there. I brushed off my wife's concerns, chalking it up to her overactive imagination. But as the days turned into weeks, and the doll's movements grew more pronounced, I could no longer deny the truth staring me in the face. One night, as I lay in bed, drifting on the edge of sleep, I heard a faint rustling from the corner of the room. My eyes snapped open, heart pounding in my chest, as I searched the darkness for the source of the sound. And there it was, the doll, perched at the foot of the bed, its eyes gleaming in the dim moonlight. I froze, paralyzed with fear, as I watched the doll's porcelain fingers wrap around the handle of a pair of scissors that lay nearby. It lifted the blades with an eerie precision, its movements fluid and deliberate, as if guided by an unseen force. My mind screamed for me to move, to flee from the room and never look back, but my body remained rooted to the spot, held captive by the doll's gaze. As the doll drew closer, its eyes seemed to bore into mine, filling me with a sense of dread unlike anything I had ever known. And then, with a sudden burst of movement, it lunged forward, the scissors glinting in the darkness as they sliced through the air. I closed my eyes, bracing for the impact, but it never came. When I dared to open them again, the doll was gone, leaving behind nothing but an empty room and the echoes of my own terrified heartbeat. But I knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning of a nightmare that would consume us all. My daughter, oblivious to the danger that lurked in her own bedroom, continued to play with the doll as if nothing had happened. It pained me to see her so carefree, ignorant of the terror that lurked just beneath the surface. But I couldn't bring myself to take the doll away, to shatter her innocence with the harsh truth of our reality. As the days passed, the doll's movements grew more frequent, more brazen. It seemed to delight in tormenting us, appearing in unexpected places, a chair in the living room, a shelf in the kitchen, each time with a different object in its grasp. And always, those glassy eyes watched us, mocking our fear with their silent gaze. I reached out to experts in the field of the paranormal, desperate for guidance in navigating the nightmare that had become our lives. But their responses were vague, filled with cryptic warnings of dark forces at play and the importance of confronting our deepest fears. It was as if they knew more than they were letting on, as if they were holding the key to unlocking the truth. One night, as I sat alone in the darkness, the doll appeared before me once more, its porcelain face twisted into a grotesque grin. "You cannot escape," it whispered, its voice a hollow echo in the silence. "I am everywhere, and nowhere. I am your worst nightmare, made flesh." With a surge of courage born of desperation, I reached out and seized the doll in my hands, ignoring the fear I had at its touch. "What do you want from us?" I demanded, my voice trembling with fear. The doll's eyes bore into mine, their gaze unyielding. "Revenge," it hissed, its voice filled with malice. "For a sin long forgotten, a debt that must be repaid. And until that debt is settled, none of you are safe." With the doll's chilling words echoing in my mind, I knew that our only hope lay in confronting the darkness that had taken hold of our lives. But to do so meant delving into the depths of a nightmare from which there might be no return. I gathered what little courage I had left and embarked on a journey into the unknown, determined to unravel the mystery that had plagued us for so long. With each step, the air grew heavier, thick with the oppressive weight of unseen forces that lurked in the shadows. At last, I reached the heart of the darkness, a forgotten corner of our home, shrouded in darkness and filled with the whispers of lost souls. There, amidst the debris of forgotten memories, I found the key to unlocking the truth, a journal, its pages yellowed with age, filled with the ramblings of a madman. As I pored over the journal's cryptic passages, a sense of dread washed over me, filling me with a primal fear unlike anything I had ever known. It spoke of rituals and sacrifices, of deals struck with entities beyond human comprehension, and of a curse that had been unleashed upon an unsuspecting world. I turned the final page, and there, in the fading light of a dying candle, I found the answer I had been searching for, the origin of the doll's malevolent spirit, the reason for its relentless pursuit of vengeance. Armed with this newfound knowledge, I confronted the doll once more, its eyes blazing with fury as I held the journal aloft. "I know what you are," I declared, my voice steady despite the fear that threatened to consume me. "And I know how to stop you." But the doll only laughed, a sound that chilled me to the bone. "You cannot stop what has already begun," it taunted, its voice echoing through the dark room. "The curse is eternal, its power beyond your comprehension. You are but a pawn in a game that has been playing out for centuries." With a surge of determination, I raised the journal high above my head and recited the incantation inscribed upon its pages, each word a prayer for deliverance from the nightmare that had consumed us. And as the final syllable left my lips, a blinding light filled the room, banishing the darkness and the doll alike. But as I stood amidst the ruins of our shattered home, I knew that the nightmare was far from over, that the darkness that had taken hold of our lives would haunt us for all eternity. Story 4. The Haunting Lullaby. I never imagined that the peaceful lullabies of my grandmother would become the source of my deepest fears. It all began after her passing, when the nights took on a haunting quality, and the gentle melodies of her voice seemed to linger in the air long after she was gone. At first, I found solace in the familiar tunes, a bittersweet reminder of the love she had bestowed upon me throughout my childhood. But as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, the lullabies took on a sinister tone, filling me with a sense of dread that I couldn't shake. Every night, as I lay in bed, I would hear her voice drifting through the darkness, soft and melodic, like a siren's call, drawing me ever closer to the edge of madness. I would rush to the window, heart pounding in my chest, only to find the empty expanse of the night sky staring back at me, devoid of any trace of my grandmother's presence. But still, the lullabies persisted, growing louder and more insistent with each passing night. They followed me wherever I went, echoing through the halls of my home like a relentless specter, haunting me even in my waking hours. And always, there was the rocking chair, swaying gently in the breeze, its creaking rhythm a constant reminder of the presence that lurked just beyond the shadows. I tried to rationalize away the phenomenon, attributing it to grief or stress-induced hallucinations. But deep down, I knew that there was something more sinister at play, that my grandmother's spirit had returned from beyond the grave to torment me with her haunting melodies. As the nights wore on, the lullabies grew louder, their haunting refrain filling every corner of my mind until I could no longer distinguish between reality and nightmare. And as I stood before the window one fateful night, gazing out into the darkness, I felt a presence behind me, a chill creeping up my spine that told me I was no longer alone. As I stood frozen before the window, a sense of dread washed over me, chilling me to the core. I could feel the weight of someone's gaze upon me, a presence that lingered just beyond the threshold of my awareness. I turned slowly, expecting to come face to face with the specter of my grandmother. But there was nothing there, save for the empty darkness of the room behind me. I scanned the shadows, heart racing in my chest, but there was no sign of the intruder who had invaded my home. And yet, the feeling of being watched persisted, a silent reminder of the unseen forces that lurked in the night. I ventured further into the room, searching for any sign of the ghostly presence that had made itself known to me. But the room remained eerily silent, the only sound the soft creaking of the rocking chair as it swayed gently in the breeze. As I approached the chair, I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. I reached out and touched the worn fabric of the seat, half expecting to feel the icy touch of a ghostly hand. But there was nothing there, only the faint impression of my grandmother's scent, a lingering reminder of the love she had bestowed upon me throughout my life. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that her ghost, or some force out of this realm, was watching over me. In the days that followed, I became consumed by the force that had ensnared my grandmother's spirit, twisting it into a malevolent entity that haunted my every dream. Each night, as I drifted into sleep, I could feel its icy grip tightening around me, pulling me into a nightmare realm where darkness reigned supreme. In these twisted dreams, I was confronted by visions of my grandmother, her once gentle voice now twisted into a haunting melody. She beckoned to me from the shadows, her eyes gleaming with an otherworldly malice. With each passing night, the dreams grew more vivid, more terrifying, until I feared closing my eyes for even a moment, lest I be dragged once more into the depths of the nightmare. And always, there was the sense that something else lurked just beyond the shadows, a malevolent force that sought to claim me for its own. The dreams began to bleed into my waking hours, filling me with a sense of dread that I couldn't shake. Shadows danced at the edge of my vision, whispers echoed through the halls of my home, and I could feel the evil force drawing closer with each passing moment. Desperate for answers, I delved deeper into the darkness, searching for any clue that might help me break free from the nightmare that had consumed me. But the answers remained elusive, hidden behind layers of fear and uncertainty. And as I stood before the window one final time, watching as the sun set on another day, I knew that the nightmare was far from over, that the malevolent force that had claimed my grandmother's spirit would stop at nothing to claim me as its next victim. Story 5. The Man in the Corner. I never imagined that the innocence of childhood could be shattered by something so sinister. It all began with my son's incessant questions about the man in the corner of his room, a figure that existed only in the depths of his imagination, or so I thought. But as the days passed and his fear grew more palpable, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something lurking in the shadows, something that defied explanation. Every night, as I tucked him into bed, he would turn to me with wide eyes, filled with a terror that sent shivers down my spine. "Why won't he stop staring at me, Daddy?" he would whisper, his voice trembling with fear. "He's always there, watching me." I tried to reassure him, to convince him that there was nothing to be afraid of, that the man in the corner was nothing more than a figment of his imagination. But each night, as I kissed him goodnight and turned off the light, I could feel the weight of his fear pressing down on me. Desperate for answers, I began to investigate the source of my son's terror, scouring his room for any sign of the mysterious figure that haunted his dreams. But no matter how hard I searched, there was no trace of the man in the corner, no evidence to support my son's claims. As the days turned into weeks, I watched helplessly as my son's fear consumed him, transforming him from a happy, carefree child into a shell of his former self. He grew pale and thin, his once bright eyes dull with exhaustion, haunted by the specter of the man who refused to leave him in peace. And then, one fateful night, as I sat beside my son's bed, trying in vain to comfort him as he tossed and turned in the grip of a nightmare, I saw something that chilled me to the bone, a shadowy figure lurking in the corner of the room, its eyes gleaming with malevolent intent. As I stared into the darkness, my heart pounding in my chest, I could feel the chill of the unknown creeping into my bones. The figure in the corner seemed to pulse with a sinister energy, its presence filling the room with a suffocating sense of dread. I reached out to switch on the light, desperate to banish the shadows and reveal the truth behind the nightmare that had taken hold of our lives. But as the light flooded the room, the figure vanished into thin air, leaving behind nothing but the echo of my son's terrified screams. I tried to rationalize away what I had seen, to convince myself that it was nothing more than a trick of the light or a product of my own overactive imagination. But deep down, I knew that the darkness that had claimed my son's room was far more sinister than I could have ever imagined. As the days passed, the haunting intensified, the figure in the corner growing more aggressive with each passing night. My son's cries filled the house, echoing through the halls like a ghostly lament, a reminder of the terror that lurked just beyond the threshold of our reality. And then, one night, as I stood alone in my son's room, watching helplessly as he slept fitfully in his bed, I felt a presence behind me, a chill creeping up my spine that told me I was no longer alone. With a sense of dread that threatened to consume me, I turned slowly, expecting to come face to face with the figure that had haunted our dreams for so long. But there was nothing there, save for the empty darkness of the room behind me. But as the room flooded with light, I saw something that filled me with a terror unlike anything I had ever known. Reflected in the mirror on the wall was the figure of a man, a dark, twisted version of myself, with eyes filled with malevolent intent. I stumbled backwards, my heart pounding in my chest, as the realization washed over me. The figure in the corner was not a ghost or a specter from beyond the grave, it was me, or rather, a manifestation of my own darkest fears and desires. For years, I had buried my guilt and shame deep within my subconscious, hiding from the truth of my actions and the consequences they had wrought. But now, faced with the horrifying reality of what I had become, I could no longer deny the darkness that lurked within me. I confronted the figure in the mirror, my voice trembling with fear and anger. "Who are you and what do you want from us?" I demanded, my words echoing through the empty room. But the figure only laughed. "I am you," it whispered, its voice filled with malice. "I am the darkness that lurks within your soul, the sins that you have tried so hard to forget. And until you confront the truth of who you are, none of you are safe." I reached out and seized the mirror, shattering it into a million pieces. And as the shards fell to the ground, reflecting the fractured image of my own shattered psyche, I knew that the nightmare was far from over, that the darkness that had taken hold of our lives would haunt us for all eternity. The shards of the broken mirror lay scattered on the floor, a reflection of the shattered reality that had once been my life. As I stood amidst the ruins of my own making, I knew that there would be no easy answers, no quick fixes to the darkness that had taken hold of my soul. Story 6. Echoes of Tomorrow. The house stood like a sentinel against the encroaching darkness, its silhouette looming ominously against the twilight sky. As I stepped through the creaking doorway, a chill ran down my spine, sending shivers cascading through my body. My grandmother had left me this old Victorian mansion in her will, a place I hadn't visited since childhood. But now, with her passing, it felt like a weighty inheritance, laden with secrets waiting to be unearthed. The air was heavy with the scent of dust and neglect as I navigated the dimly lit corridors, the floorboards groaning underfoot. Every corner seemed to harbor shadows, whispering secrets long forgotten. As I ascended the staircase to the attic, a sense of trepidation gnawed at the edges of my consciousness, urging me to turn back. But curiosity held me in its grasp, pulling me ever closer to the unknown. At last, I reached the attic, the space bathed in the soft glow of moonlight filtering through grimy windows. Amongst the forgotten relics of years gone by, I spotted an old trunk tucked away in the corner, covered in cobwebs and neglect. With trembling hands, I pried it open, revealing a treasure trove of forgotten memories. Nestled amidst moth-eaten clothes and yellowed photographs, I found a weathered journal, its pages brittle with age. As I flipped through its contents, a sense of unease settled over me. The entries were written in my own handwriting, detailing mundane occurrences with eerie precision. But what chilled me to the bone was the final entry, dated for tomorrow, foretelling events that had yet to pass. A cold sweat broke out across my brow as I grappled with the implications of my discovery. How could I have written about events that hadn't occurred? And who, or what, was orchestrating this sinister game of cat and mouse? I knew that I had stumbled upon something beyond my understanding, something dark and malevolent lurking within the shadows of my own mind. The following day dawned with a sense of foreboding, each passing moment weighed down by the knowledge of the journal's ominous prediction. I tried to rationalize it away, attributing it to stress or a trick of the mind, but the creeping unease refused to be silenced. Every sound seemed amplified, every shadow elongated, as if the very fabric of reality was unraveling before my eyes. As night descended once more, I found myself drawn back to the attic, the journal burning a hole in my pocket like a lead weight. With trepidation clawing at my insides, I retraced the steps of the previous night, the air thick with a palpable sense of dread. But as I reached the attic threshold, a sudden gust of wind slammed the door shut behind me, sealing my fate within its confines. The darkness seemed to press in on all sides, suffocating me with its embrace. I fumbled for the light switch, but my fingers found only empty air, the darkness swallowing them whole. Panic rose within me like a tidal wave, threatening to consume me whole, but I forced myself to stay calm, to think logically amidst the chaos. As my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I noticed something different about the attic, something that sent a chill racing down my spine. The objects that had once littered the space were gone, replaced by an eerie emptiness that seemed to stretch into infinity. And in the center of it all stood a mirror, its surface shimmering with an otherworldly glow. With a sense of trepidation, I approached the mirror, my reflection wavering in its distorted surface. But as I gazed into its depths, I realized with a growing sense of horror that the figure staring back at me was not my own. Its eyes gleamed with a malevolent light, its lips twisted into a mocking smile that stretched through the whole room. I stumbled backwards in terror, my heart pounding like a drum in my chest. This was no ordinary mirror, no mere trick of the light. It was a gateway, a portal to a realm beyond comprehension, and I had unwittingly stumbled into its grasp. With a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach, I knew that I was trapped, caught in a nightmare from which there was no escape. Time seemed to stretch and warp within the confines of the attic, each moment dragging on for an eternity as I grappled with the horror of my predicament. The mirror beckoned to me like a siren's call, its surface rippling with evil. I knew that I had to find a way out, to break free from its sinister grasp before it was too late. I reached out towards the mirror, my fingers brushing against its cool surface. The world seemed to blur and shift around me, reality bending and twisting like a funhouse. And then, with a sudden jolt, I was sucked into its depths, hurtling through the void towards an unknown destination. When I emerged on the other side, I found myself in a place that bore no resemblance to the world I had left behind. The air was thick with an otherworldly chill, the landscape bathed in an eerie half-light that cast long, twisted shadows across the barren landscape. It was a place of nightmares, a realm where the rules of reality no longer applied. As I stumbled through the desolate landscape, I felt a sense of dread gnawing at the edges of my consciousness. I was not alone in this forsaken realm. I could sense it lurking just beyond the veil of shadows, watching and waiting with bated breath. And then, in the distance, I saw it, a towering edifice of darkness, its spires reaching towards the heavens like twisted fingers. With a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach, I knew that I had no choice but to press forward, to confront the source of the darkness that threatened to consume me whole. As I drew closer to the ominous structure, I could hear whispers echoing on the wind, voices from a time long forgotten. With each step, the whispers grew louder, their words twisting and warping in my mind like a dagger to the soul. And then, as I reached the threshold of the ancient fortress, I saw it, the source of the darkness that had plagued me since my arrival in this accursed realm. Standing before me was a figure cloaked in shadow, its form shifting and changing like smoke on the wind. Its eyes gleamed with an otherworldly light, boring into my very soul with a malevolent intensity. And then, it spoke, a single word that echoed through the darkness like a death knell. "Welcome," it whispered, its voice dripping with malice. "Welcome to your new home." Story 7. The Ring of Remorse. The eerie creaking of floorboards echoed through the dimly lit hallway as I stumbled out of bed, my heart pounding in my chest. It was 3:33 a.m. again, the cursed hour that had plagued my nights for weeks. I rubbed my weary eyes, the weight of exhaustion pressing down on me like a suffocating blanket. Every night, without fail, I would awaken to find it there, the ring. It was her ring, the one I buried her with. A token of our love, now haunting me in the dead of night. I couldn't explain it, couldn't rationalize how it found its way onto my finger each time I woke, cold sweat clinging to my skin. I tried to remove it, to cast it away, but it clung to me like a sinister specter, a reminder of the guilt that gnawed at my soul. My footsteps faltered as I reached the hallway mirror, my reflection warped and distorted in the dim light. I stared at the ring, glinting malevolently on my finger, a silent accusation in the stillness of the night. How could I have let her go? How could I have failed her? The house groaned around me, its ancient timbers whispering secrets long forgotten. I shivered, a chill creeping up my spine as I turned away from the mirror, desperate to escape the accusing gaze of my own reflection. But there was no escape, not from the memories that haunted me, not from the ring that bound me to her. As I stumbled back towards the bedroom, the darkness seemed to close in around me, suffocating and oppressive. Shadows danced on the walls, twisting and contorting into grotesque shapes that seemed to mock my torment. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing the darkness away, but it clung to me like a second skin, taunting me with whispered promises of oblivion. I collapsed onto the bed, the weight of exhaustion dragging me down into the depths of unconsciousness. But even in sleep, there was no respite, no escape from the nightmares that plagued me. I tossed and turned, caught in a maelstrom of guilt and despair, until at last, merciful oblivion claimed me. The morning sun filtered through the curtains, casting a pale glow over the room as I blinked away the remnants of sleep. My hand instinctively went to my chest, but there was no ring this time, no tangible reminder of the horrors that haunted my nights. I breathed a sigh of relief, fleeting though it was, as I pushed myself out of bed, determined to shake off the lingering unease that clung to me like a shroud. But as I made my way downstairs, the memories came flooding back with a vengeance, each step a painful reminder of the life I had lost. The house felt different now, somehow colder and more distant, as if it too mourned the absence of its former inhabitants. I tried to shake off the feeling of foreboding, but it clung to me like a shadow, refusing to be dispelled. I forced myself to focus on the mundane tasks of daily life, the monotony of routine providing a brief respite from the relentless onslaught of memories. But no matter how hard I tried to distract myself, her presence lingered in every corner of the house, a spectral presence that refused to be ignored. I found myself drawn to her room, the door looming ominously at the end of the hallway like a silent sentinel guarding its secrets. With trembling hands, I pushed it open, the musty scent of stale air and forgotten dreams washing over me like a tidal wave. The room was frozen in time, a snapshot of a life abruptly ended, a life that should have been mine to share. I sank to the floor, the weight of grief pressing down on me like a leaden blanket as I traced my fingers along the faded photographs that adorned the walls. Each image was a painful reminder of what I had lost, a cruel mockery of the happiness that had once been ours. But amidst the sorrow, there was something else, a whisper of something sinister lurking just beneath the surface, a feeling of unease that prickled at the edges of my consciousness. I tried to push it away, to bury it deep beneath the facade of normalcy, but it refused to be silenced, growing louder and more insistent with each passing moment. I stumbled out of the room, the walls closing in around me as I fled from the suffocating embrace of her memory. But no matter where I went, her presence followed, a presence that haunted my every waking moment. And as the day gave way to night, I knew that no amount of running could save me from the horrors that awaited me in the darkness. Night descended, casting the world into darkness as the hour approached, the dreaded hour when the veil between the living and the dead grew thin, when the whispers of the past echoed through the silence of the night. I lay in bed, my heart pounding in my chest as the minutes ticked by, each second stretching into eternity as I waited for the inevitable. And then it came, the sound of laughter, cold and cruel, echoing through the empty corridors of the house. My blood ran cold as I listened, paralyzed with fear as the laughter grew louder, more insistent, until it seemed to fill the very air around me with its malevolent presence. I stumbled out of bed, my limbs heavy with dread as I made my way towards her room, drawn inexorably towards the source of the laughter. The door loomed before me, a barrier between the safety of the present and the horrors of the past. I pushed it open, the darkness within swallowing me whole as I stepped inside. And there she was, her form illuminated by the pale moonlight that streamed through the window, her eyes alight with a creepy madness. She laughed, a sound devoid of joy or sanity, her voice echoing through the silence like a death knell. I stumbled backwards, the weight of her gaze bearing down on me like a leaden weight as I tried to make sense of the impossible. She was dead, buried deep beneath the earth, and yet here she stood before me, her presence a twisted mockery of the life we once shared. I wanted to scream, to flee from the nightmare that unfolded before me, but I was rooted to the spot, unable to tear my gaze away from her haunting visage. She advanced towards me, her laughter growing louder with each step, until it filled the room with its deafening cacophony. And then, with a suddenness that stole the breath from my lungs, she was upon me, her hands closing around my throat with a vice-like grip. I struggled against her, gasping for air as she laughed, her eyes alight with an unexplainable evil. The hour struck 3:34 a.m. and she was gone once again. But even as darkness closed in around me, I knew that this was not the end, that the horrors that awaited me in the darkness were far worse than anything I could have imagined. And as her laughter echoed through the empty corridors of the house, I knew that my fate was sealed, that I was doomed to spend eternity trapped in a nightmare from which there could be no escape. Story 8. The Haunting Message. The night was thick with shadows, and a sense of unease clung to the air like a suffocating fog. I stirred from my slumber, the darkness pressing in around me as I reached out for my wife, expecting to find her warm body beside me. But my hand met empty space, and a chill crept down my spine as I realized she was not there. Panic surged within me, my heart racing as I sat up in bed, searching the room frantically. My eyes fell upon her side of the bed, neatly made as if she had never slept there at all. A sense of dread washed over me, icy tendrils wrapping around my heart as I scanned the room for any sign of her. And then, I saw it, the soft glow of her phone on the nightstand, the screen illuminated with an eerie light. I reached for the phone, my hands trembling as I unlocked the screen and saw the message displayed there, a recording of her voice, faint and trembling, repeating the same words over and over again, "Help me, please." The words were echoing through the silence of the night like a ghostly refrain. I felt a surge of adrenaline coursing through my veins, driving me to action as I leaped out of bed and rushed downstairs, the sound of her voice haunting me every step of the way. I searched every room of the house, calling out her name into the darkness, but there was no sign of her. Panic clawed at my chest, threatening to consume me whole as I realized she was gone, vanished without a trace into the night. I stumbled back upstairs, the weight of despair crushing me as I collapsed onto the bed, her phone still clutched tightly in my hand. I played the recording again and again, hoping for some clue, some sign of where she might be. But there was nothing, only the sound of her voice, pleading for help from some unseen horror that lurked just beyond the edge of perception. As the first light of dawn began to creep through the curtains, I knew that I could not rest until I found her, that I would search every dark corner and hidden recess until I brought her home again. But little did I know that the horrors awaiting me were far worse than anything I could have imagined. The days stretched into weeks, and still, there was no sign of her. I haunted the streets like a restless spirit, searching every alley and abandoned building for any trace of my wife. But the city remained silent, its secrets hidden behind closed doors and boarded-up windows. I returned home each night, the weight of despair pressing down on me like a leaden cloak. The recording on her phone taunted me, its haunting melody a constant reminder of the nightmare that had become my reality. I played it over and over again, hoping against all that it would reveal some hidden clue, some hint of where she might be. But each time, it was the same, a voice crying out in the darkness, lost and afraid. I felt as though I were losing my mind, trapped in a never-ending cycle of despair and longing. And then, one night, as I lay in bed, the recording began to change. At first, it was subtle, a faint distortion in her voice, a hint of something darker lurking just beneath the surface. But as I listened, the distortion grew stronger, the words becoming twisted and garbled until they were almost unrecognizable. And then, with a suddenness that stole my breath away, the recording stopped altogether, replaced by a deafening silence. I stared at the phone in disbelief, my heart pounding in my chest as I realized that something was terribly wrong. I tried to call out to her, to plead with her to come back to me, but there was no response, only the cold emptiness of the night. I knew then that I had to find her, no matter the cost. I gathered my courage and ventured out into the darkness once more, determined to uncover the truth behind her disappearance. The city seemed to close in around me, its streets twisting and turning like a labyrinth of shadows. I stumbled through the darkness, my senses on high alert as I searched for any sign of her presence. And then, just when I was beginning to lose hope, I saw it, a flicker of movement in the alley ahead. I rushed forward, my heart pounding in my chest as I rounded the corner and came face to face with her, the woman I loved, trapped in the clutches of a darkness beyond imagining. She stared at me with vacant eyes, her voice little more than a whisper as she uttered the words that would change everything. "Run," she said, her voice barely audible over the roar of the darkness that surrounded us. "Run, before it's too late." I stood frozen in place, my mind reeling as I tried to make sense of the horrors unfolding before me. My wife's words echoed in my ears, a desperate plea for salvation from a fate too terrible to comprehend. But as I looked into her vacant eyes, I knew that there was no saving her, that she was lost to me forever. And then, with a suddenness that stole the breath from my lungs, the darkness surged forward, enveloping her like a fire. I cried out in horror, reaching out for her, but she was gone, swallowed up by the abyss that lurked just beyond the edge of perception. I stumbled backwards, my heart pounding in my chest as I turned and fled into the night, the sound of her screams echoing in my ears. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs threatened to give out beneath me, the darkness nipping at my heels like a hungry beast. But no matter how fast I ran, I could not escape it, its tendrils reaching out to drag me down into the abyss. I felt myself slipping, teetering on the edge of oblivion. And then, just when I thought all hope was lost, I saw it, a glimmer of light in the distance, a beacon of hope in the sea of darkness. I pushed on with all I had, the light growing brighter with each step until at last, I emerged into the open air, gasping for breath as the darkness fell away behind me. I collapsed onto the ground, my body racked with exhaustion as I stared up at the sky, the first light of dawn painting the horizon with hues of pink and gold. And as I lay there, battered and broken, I knew that I had escaped the darkness, but at what cost? For even now, as the sun rises on a new day, I can still feel its presence lurking just beyond the edge of sight, waiting to drag me back into the abyss from which I may never escape. Story 9. Through the Keyhole. I awoke to an oppressive silence, the kind that presses against your eardrums and fills you with an inexplicable dread. My room, usually bathed in the soft glow of the morning sun, was shrouded in darkness. I reached for the switch, but the light refused to obey. Confused, I stumbled to the door, only to find it wouldn't budge. It was locked from the outside. Panic clawed at my chest as I pounded on the wood, calling out for anyone who might hear. But the house remained silent, as if it were holding its breath. I turned to the window, but it was sealed shut, not even a whisper of wind coming through. I was trapped, isolated in my own sanctuary. As I slumped against the door, defeated, my eye caught a sliver of light from the keyhole. Curiosity overpowered my fear, and I peered through, expecting to see the familiar hallway. Instead, I saw an eye. My own eye, staring back at me with an intensity that was paralyzing. The sight sent a chill down my spine. How could this be? Was it a trick of the light, or something more sinister? I backed away, my mind racing with impossible scenarios. The room felt smaller, the walls inching closer with every panicked breath I took. I had to get out. I searched for anything that could aid my escape, but the room was bare, stripped of anything useful. The only thing left was the mirror on the wall. As I approached it, I noticed something odd. My reflection wasn't mimicking my movements. It was smiling at me. The smile wasn't kind or reassuring. It was twisted, filled with malice. And then it spoke, its voice a distorted echo of my own. "You're not alone," it whispered. "You'll never be alone again." I recoiled in horror, the room spinning around me. The mirror's surface rippled, and a hand reached out, beckoning me to join it on the other side. That's when I heard it, the sound of the door unlocking from the outside. The mirror's invitation hung in the air, its glass surface still rippling like a disturbed pond. My heart raced as I stepped closer, drawn by a force I couldn't comprehend. The hand beckoned, fingers elongated and skeletal, and I hesitated. What awaited me on the other side? The room seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. Shadows clung to the corners, their edges sharp and hungry. I glanced back at the locked door, the keyhole now empty. The eye had vanished, but its gaze lingered, etched into my mind like a curse. "Come," the mirror whispered, its voice a haunting echo. "Cross the threshold. Discover the truth." My reflection grinned wider, teeth sharp and plenty. I pressed my palm against the glass, and it yielded, like a membrane between worlds. The room beyond was a distorted version of my own, a twisted reflection. The walls dripped with darkness, and the floor seemed to writhe beneath my feet. I stepped through, and the mirror swallowed me whole. The air on the other side was thick, suffocating. I stumbled into a hallway that stretched infinitely in both directions. Doors lined the walls, each identical to the one I'd been trapped behind. But these doors were open, revealing glimpses of other rooms, other lives. The whispering began, a chorus of voices that slithered through the cracks. They spoke of forgotten sins, lost memories, and the price of curiosity. I followed the sound, drawn toward a flickering light at the end of the hall. The voices grew louder, more urgent, urging me forward. The light emanated from a room unlike the others. Its door was ornate, carved with symbols I couldn't decipher. As I pushed it open, the whispers reached a fever pitch. The room was empty except for a mirror, an ancient, tarnished mirror that seemed to hold the weight of centuries. My reflection stared back at me, but it was different now. Its eyes were hollow, devoid of humanity. "You've crossed the threshold," it murmured. "Now you see what lies beyond." I gazed into the mirror, and the room shifted. Shadows danced along the walls, revealing glimpses of other worlds, twisted landscapes, grotesque creatures, and fractured memories. The whispers coalesced into words, a warning etched into my very bones. "You're not alone," they hissed. "We've been waiting." And then the mirror shattered, shards of glass embedding themselves in my skin. The pain was exquisite, and as I fell to the floor, bleeding and broken, I glimpsed something beyond the fractured glass, a realm of nightmares, hungry and vast. The shards of the mirror cut deep, and I lay bleeding on the cold floor. The whispers had intensified, their words a cacophony of despair. I tried to crawl away, but my limbs felt heavy, as if they were sinking into the very fabric of reality. The room around me shifted, its walls pulsating like a living organism. The ceiling dripped with inky tendrils, and the floor seemed to stretch infinitely downward. I was no longer in my house, I was in a place beyond comprehension, a place where nightmares took form. The mirror, now shattered, reflected nothing but darkness. I forced myself to my feet, ignoring the pain. The whispers guided me, urging me toward the abyss that yawned before me. I stumbled forward, each step an eternity, until I stood at the precipice. The darkness below was absolute, a void that threatened to swallow me whole. I peered into it, and my reflection stared back, an abomination of flesh and shadow. Its eye, my eye, held secrets I couldn't fathom. It knew things, ancient truths that would unravel my sanity. "You've glimpsed the other side," it murmured. "The eye that watches, the door that locks. They are one and the same." I tried to speak, but my voice was lost in the void. The whispers grew louder, their urgency pushing me closer to the edge. I had a choice, to step back, to return to my locked room, or to leap into the abyss and discover what lay beyond. The pain in my chest intensified, as if my heart were tearing itself apart. The mirror's curse had seeped into my veins, and I understood, I was the key. My eye, my gaze, held the power to unlock the door between worlds. But at what cost? I closed my eyes, took a breath, and stepped off the edge. The darkness swallowed me whole, and I fell, through layers of reality, through forgotten memories, through the very fabric of existence. The whispers followed, their voices merging into a single scream. And then I landed, not on solid ground, but in a place of shifting shapes and fractured light. The abyss had become a labyrinth, its walls alive with pulsing veins. I stumbled forward, my eyes still fixed on the door, the final door. It stood at the center of the maze, its wood warped and ancient. I reached for the handle, my fingers trembling. The whispers had ceased, replaced by a hollow silence. I turned the knob, and the door swung open. Beyond lay a room, an exact replica of my own. The bed, the dresser, the window, all identical. But there was one difference, the mirror. It hung on the wall, whole and unbroken. And in its glass, I saw myself, whole and unbroken. My reflection smiled, its teeth sharp and hungry. "Welcome home," it said. "You've crossed the threshold." Story 10. The Mirror's Grasp. I always believed our house held secrets, but nothing prepared me for the day the mirror in our bedroom changed everything. My wife, Clara, had always been the rational one, dismissing my uneasy feelings about the antique mirror we inherited from her grandmother. "It's just old and creepy, like all old things," she'd say with a laugh. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Every morning, as we got ready for the day, I noticed Clara's reflection lagging behind her movements. Just a few seconds, barely noticeable, but it was there. I mentioned it once, and she shrugged it off as a trick of the light. But today, as she adjusted her hair, her reflection didn't just lag, it reached out. A pale hand, slow and deliberate, emerged from the glass and grasped her wrist. Clara's scream pierced the morning air, a sound so raw and terrified that it rooted me to the spot. The reflection's grip tightened, and I saw fear flood Clara's eyes. I lunged forward, trying to pull her away, but it was like fighting an invisible force. Her reflection, now moving with a will of its own, began to pull her toward the mirror. Desperate, I grabbed the heavy candlestick from our dresser and swung it at the glass. The mirror shattered, sending shards flying across the room, but instead of freeing Clara, it seemed to unleash the entity. The room grew cold, and the air thickened with a sense of dread. Clara's reflection, now unbound from the broken pieces, moved freely, its eyes, dark voids, fixated on us. We fled the room, slamming the door behind us. My mind raced with impossible questions. What was that thing? How could a reflection exist without a mirror? And most importantly, how could we stop it? The rest of the day passed in a blur of frantic research and whispered arguments. Clara wanted to leave, but I was convinced we needed answers. As night fell, we huddled together in the living room, jumping at every creak and groan of the old house. Then, as the clock struck midnight, we heard it, the sound of glass scraping against glass, coming from the direction of our bedroom. The door handle rattled, and a sliver of darkness appeared beneath the door. Something was coming. The house groaned as if it shared our fear. Clara clung to me, her breaths ragged. The door rattled, and the darkness beneath it widened. I glanced at the shattered mirror in the hallway, the gateway that had allowed the reflection to escape. But what did it want? Why had it chosen Clara? We retreated to the kitchen, where the moonlight filtered through the curtains, casting eerie shadows on the floor. I pulled out my phone, desperate for answers. The internet offered nothing, no ancient curses, no folklore about sentient reflections. It was as if our tormentor existed outside the realm of human knowledge. Clara's hand trembled as she traced the scar on her wrist, the same wrist the reflection had grabbed. What if it's still out there? She whispered. What if it's waiting for us? I had no answers, only theories. Maybe the mirror had been a prison, and breaking it had set the reflection free. Or perhaps it was a malevolent doppelganger, mimicking Clara's movements until it gained enough strength to break free. As the clock ticked toward 3 a.m., we heard a soft tapping against the kitchen window. Clara gasped, her eyes wide. Outside, in the moonlight, stood her reflection. It pressed its hand against the glass, fingers splayed like spider legs. Its eyes bore into ours, devoid of any humanity. Clara, I said, my voice barely audible. We have to confront it. We can't keep running. She nodded, her resolve firm. We stepped outside, the night air biting our skin. The reflection mirrored our movements, but its touch was ice cold. Clara faced it, her eyes unwavering. What do you want? She demanded. The reflection's lips moved, but no sound emerged. Instead, images flooded my mind, memories of Clara's childhood, secrets she'd never shared. It knew her better than I did. And it hungered for something more. Clara stepped closer, her hand inches from the reflections. Take me back, she whispered. Take me back into the mirror. The reflection hesitated, then nodded. Its grip tightened, pulling Clara toward the shattered remnants of the antique mirror. I lunged, grabbing her other hand. Together, we fought against the force, our breaths misting in the cold night. But the reflection was relentless. It wanted Clara, body and soul. As the mirror's surface rippled, threatening to swallow her whole, Clara turned to me. Remember me, she said, tears streaming down her face. Remember us. And then she let go. The mirror sealed shut, leaving me alone in the moonlit garden. Clara's reflection stared back at me, its eyes filled with longing. And somewhere beyond the glass, Clara waited, a prisoner in her own reflection. The house became a tomb after Clara vanished into the mirror. I slept little, haunted by her absence. The reflection still lingered, watching me from the shattered remnants of the antique mirror. Its eyes followed my every move, and I wondered if it hungered for another victim. Days blurred into weeks. I researched ancient texts, desperate for a solution. The mirror was more than an object, it was a portal to a realm beyond our understanding. I visited antique shops, seeking answers from old shopkeepers who whispered about cursed artifacts and lost souls. One evening, as rain drummed against the window, I received a cryptic message. An anonymous email with a single sentence, "The reflection seeks balance." Balance? What did that mean? I returned to the mirror, my breath fogging the glass. The reflection stared back, its expression unreadable. "What do you want?" I demanded. Its lips moved, but no sound emerged. Instead, images flooded my mind, memories of Clara, our laughter, our shared dreams. The reflection had consumed her essence, leaving only a hollow shell behind. But why? I remembered Clara's words, "Remember me." Perhaps that was the key. I needed to understand the reflection's origins, its purpose. And so, armed with determination, I delved deeper. The mirror's history revealed a tragic tale. A woman named Eloan, scorned by her lover, had shattered the mirror in despair. Her reflection had escaped, seeking revenge. Eloan had vanished, leaving behind only a name etched into the frame. Eloan. The reflection's name. I traced the letters, whispering them aloud. The mirror trembled, and the reflection's eyes widened. It understood. Eloan wanted balance, to reclaim her stolen life. But how could I help her without losing Clara forever? I returned to the mirror each night, speaking to Eloan. She revealed fragments of her past, a love betrayed, a curse invoked. She yearned for release, but at what cost? The reflection grew stronger, its touch colder. I feared it would consume me too. Then, one stormy night, Eloan's voice echoed in my mind. "The mirror must be made whole," she said. "Only then can I return." I gathered the shattered pieces, each shard sharp as regret. Eloan guided me, whispering forgotten incantations. The mirror reassembled, its surface rippling like water. I hesitated, my heart torn between Clara and Eloan. The reflection stepped forward, its hand outstretched. "Balance," it murmured. I took a deep breath, my decision made. I pressed my palm against the mirror, merging our reflections. Eloan's eyes met mine, gratitude and sorrow intertwined. And then, with a final surge of energy, she stepped back into the glass. The mirror sealed shut, leaving me alone in the moonlit room. Clara's reflection stared back at me, her eyes filled with longing. But Eloan's presence lingered, a whisper in the air. I touched the glass, feeling the warmth of both women, the love and loss, the sacrifice. Clara was gone, but Eloan had found peace. And as I turned away, I knew the mirror held more secrets, more reflections waiting to be set free. Story 11. The Unseen Voices. I had always considered my life rather ordinary until the whispers started. At first, they were just faint murmurs, like the rustling of leaves carried by a distant wind. But as days passed, they grew clearer, more insistent, and deeply personal. They told me secrets, dark, twisted secrets that no one else knew, secrets that I wish I could unhear. But last night, something changed. They whispered my name. The first whisper came on a night much like any other. I was lying in bed, the world around me silent except for the occasional car passing by outside. Then, I heard it, a voice, so soft it was almost a sigh, saying, "Micah." My heart raced. I live alone, and the weight of that solitude pressed down on me like a physical force. I tried to dismiss it as a trick of my imagination. But the next night, the voice returned, this time with a message that sent shivers down my spine. "They're watching you, Micah," it hissed, and I felt the presence of unseen eyes upon me. I searched my apartment, but found nothing amiss. Yet, the sensation of being observed lingered. The whispers didn't stop. Each night, they revealed things about my neighbors, my friends, even strangers. Things that were true, things that no one should know. I began to dread the night and the secrets it brought. But fear also sparked curiosity. Who, or what, was speaking to me? Then came the night that changed everything. As I lay in bed, the whispers grew into a cacophony of voices, all chanting my name. "Micah, Micah, Micah," they echoed, growing louder with each repetition. I clutched my ears, trying to block them out, but they were inside my head, impossible to silence. In desperation, I screamed, "What do you want from me?" The voices fell silent, and for a moment, there was peace. But it was short-lived. A single, clear voice spoke, chilling me to the bone. "We want you to join us, Micah. We've been waiting for you." I sat up, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The room was dark, the shadows seeming to move and whisper secrets of their own. I knew then that I couldn't ignore the voices any longer. I had to find out what they wanted, why they had chosen me. And so, with trembling hands, I reached for the lamp beside my bed, steeling myself for what I might see when the light pierced the darkness. The whispers consumed my days and nights, their insistent voices gnawing at my sanity. I became a recluse, avoiding friends, work, and sunlight. My apartment felt like a prison, the walls closing in as if they, too, harbored secrets. I needed answers, and the only way to find them was to delve deeper into the darkness. I researched ancient texts, desperate to understand the origin of these unseen voices. They spoke of a forgotten ritual, one that bridged the gap between the living and the dead. The ritual required a willing participant, a conduit for the spirits to communicate. Was that why they chose me? Had I unwittingly invited them into my life? My sleep became fitful, haunted by nightmares. I saw faces, pale, twisted, and hollow-eyed, hovering just beyond the veil of consciousness. They reached out, their spectral fingers brushing my skin, leaving icy trails. Their mouths moved, but no sound emerged. Only the whispers remained, a cacophony of secrets and regrets. One night, as the moon hung low in the sky, I decided to confront them. Armed with a candle and a mirror, I sat cross-legged on the floor. The whispers intensified, urging me forward. I recited the incantation I had found in the ancient texts, my voice trembling. The room grew colder, and the mirror fogged, revealing distorted reflections of my own face. "Who are you?" I demanded, my breath visible in the frigid air. The whispers merged into a single voice, a chorus of souls. "We are the forgotten," it said. "The ones lost between realms. We seek release, redemption." "Why me?" I asked, my heart pounding. "Why choose me as your conduit?" "You hear us," the voice replied. "Your empathy, your loneliness, it drew us to you. But there is a price. To free us, you must sacrifice something dear." "What?" I whispered, my mind racing. "What must I give up?" The mirror rippled, revealing images of my childhood, a beloved teddy bear, my grandmother's locket, my first love's letters. "Choose," the voice urged. "Or remain haunted forever." I hesitated, torn between fear and curiosity. But then I remembered the secrets they had whispered, the affairs, the betrayals, the hidden crimes. I couldn't bear their weight any longer. With trembling hands, I picked up the locket, its silver chain cool against my skin. The mirror shattered, and the room filled with blinding light. The whispers surged, their voices triumphant. And as the locket disintegrated in my grasp, I felt a release, a freedom from the burden of their secrets. But last night, they whispered my name again. Louder, more urgent. And this time, they promised something darker, a revelation that would change everything. The following days were a blur of anxiety and anticipation. The locket, the sacrifice I had made to free the forgotten souls, weighed heavily around my neck. Its silver surface bore no trace of the intricate design it once held. Instead, it was smooth, featureless, as if it had absorbed the darkness within. The whispers persisted, but now they were different. They no longer spoke of mundane secrets. Instead, they hinted at something ancient, something beyond human comprehension. They guided me to places, the abandoned church on the outskirts of town, the gnarled oak tree in the cemetery, the crumbling well behind my apartment building. Each location held a piece of the puzzle, a fragment of the truth. I followed their instructions, driven by a mix of fear and curiosity. The church was a desolate place, its stained glass windows shattered, the pews covered in dust. In the center of the nave stood an altar, its stone surface etched with symbols I couldn't decipher. The whispers grew louder, urging me to touch it. As my fingers grazed the cold stone, images flooded my mind, rituals, sacrifices, and a hunger for power that transcended time. Next was the oak tree. Its twisted roots seemed to reach into the earth's core, drawing sustenance from something otherworldly. I dug, my hands blistering, until I unearthed a wooden box. Inside lay a brittle parchment, its ink faded but legible. It spoke of a pact, the same pact that bound the forgotten souls to this realm. A pact forged in blood, sealed with secrets. Finally, the well. Its depths were impenetrable, swallowing light and sound. I lowered a rope, my heart pounding. The whispers urged me to descend, promising answers below. As I reached the water's surface, I glimpsed faces, hundreds of them, floating in the darkness. Their eyes bore into mine, pleading, accusing. They were the forgotten, the ones who had paid the price before me. "Why?" I shouted, my voice echoing off the well's walls. "Why did you choose me?" The whispers merged into a single voice, resonating from the depths. "Because you listened," it said. "Because you were willing to hear the truth. But there is one final secret, the key to our release." "What is it?" I demanded. "Your name," the voice replied. "Your true name, the one whispered by the wind, carried by the stars. Speak it, and the pact will be broken." I hesitated. My name, my identity, was all I had left. But the whispers had become a part of me, their secrets etched into my soul. Could I sever that connection? Last night, as the moon hung low once more, I stood at the edge of the well. The forgotten souls watched, their eyes hollow, their voices urging me onward. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding, and spoke my true name, the one that had haunted my dreams, the one that bound me to them. The well trembled, its water churning. And then, with a deafening roar, it split open, revealing a void, an abyss that swallowed everything. The forgotten souls dissipated, their whispers fading into nothingness. But as I stepped back, I heard a new voice, a familiar one. It whispered my name, not in fear or desperation, but in triumph. And I realized that the secrets I had uncovered were only the beginning. There were other realms, other forgotten souls waiting to be heard. And so, I continue my journey, seeking answers, unraveling mysteries. But last night, they whispered my name again, the name that binds me to their world. And this time, they promised something darker, a revelation that would change everything. Story 12. The Unseen Room. I had always prided myself on being a rational person, never one to indulge in superstitions or ghost stories. That was until the day my daughter, Lily, received an antique dollhouse from her grandmother. It was a spitting image of our Victorian home, crafted with an eerie attention to detail. Each miniature furniture piece, the wallpaper, even the family portraits were replicas of our own. The dollhouse became Lily's obsession. She spent hours arranging and rearranging the tiny rooms, whispering stories to her dolls. I found it endearing until I noticed something peculiar. There was an extra room in the dollhouse, one that didn't exist in our home. It was a plain, unadorned space, save for the small figures seated around a table, mirroring our family. I tried to dismiss it as a quirk of the toy, but the room unnerved me. It felt like a silent challenge, a puzzle meant for me to solve. As days passed, the figures' positions changed, always when we weren't looking. They moved with purpose, enacting scenes of daily life with disturbing accuracy. One evening, as I passed by the dollhouse, I heard faint whispers emanating from the tiny room. I leaned in, straining to listen, and the voices stopped abruptly, replaced by a cold draft that made the hairs on my neck stand. The figures were all turned, their painted eyes fixed on me, expressions blank yet somehow accusatory. I decided to investigate the anomaly, searching our home for any sign of hidden spaces. My efforts were fruitless, yet the sensation of being watched grew stronger. Lily began to speak of dreams where she played in a room just like the one in the dollhouse, with her silent, miniature family. The line between reality and imagination blurred as I found myself drawn to the dollhouse at odd hours, compelled to observe the figures. They were no longer just toys, they held secrets, a story that was unfolding parallel to ours. And I feared what it might mean for my family. The dollhouse consumed my thoughts. I researched its origins, tracing it back to a reclusive artist named Evelyn Hartwood. She had vanished decades ago, leaving behind a legacy of eerie miniatures. The dollhouse was her masterpiece, and it seemed to harbor a dark secret. Lily's behavior changed too. She spoke less, her eyes distant as if she communed with unseen forces. She'd sit cross-legged in front of the dollhouse, whispering to the figures. I watched, torn between fascination and dread. The room within the dollhouse grew more elaborate. The tiny family now had a miniature fireplace, a clock that ticked in sync with ours, and a door that led to nowhere. One night, unable to resist, I entered Lily's room. The dollhouse glowed, its windows casting eerie shadows. The figures were arranged in a circle, hands clasped. Their painted eyes bore into mine. I felt their silent plea, "Join us." I hesitated, then placed my finger on the table. The room shifted, and I was inside. The air smelled of old wood and forgotten memories. The figures stood around me, their expressions shifting from blankness to anticipation. Lily sat at the head of the table, her eyes wide. "Daddy," she whispered, "we've been waiting for you." I tried to speak, but my voice failed. The room pulsed, and I glimpsed our real home through the window, a distorted reflection. The figures were more than toys, they were conduits, bridging our world and theirs. I understood their purpose, to mirror our lives, absorb our emotions, and feed off our energy. Lily's eyes held knowledge beyond her years. "They want you to complete the ritual," she said. "To become one of them." I shook my head, but the room pressed in. The figures leaned closer, their painted mouths opening. I felt their hunger, their longing for release. They were trapped, and I was the key. As I raised my hand, the room blurred. The dollhouse trembled, and I glimpsed Evelyn Hartwood's face, an echo from the past. She had sacrificed herself to create this link, and now it demanded payment. The room whispered secrets. The unseen room exists in every home, hidden behind walls and reality. It hungers for souls, for stories left untold. I hesitated, torn between my daughter and the abyss. The figures leaned closer, their painted eyes pleading. And in that moment, I made my choice. The room within the dollhouse pulsed, its walls closing in. I stood at the precipice, torn between my daughter and the abyss. The figures watched, their painted eyes pleading, and I knew there was no turning back. Lily's voice echoed, "Daddy, they're waiting." I glanced at her, her face pale, eyes wide. She had become a bridge between worlds, a conduit like Evelyn Hartwood. The unseen room hungered for souls, for stories left untold, and I was its next offering. The figures shifted, their tiny hands reaching for me. I stepped closer, the air thick with anticipation. The room whispered secrets. To join them, I must relinquish my memories, my fears, my very essence. I thought of our real home, the creaking stairs, the warmth of the dining room, my wife's laughter. But the unseen room promised something more, a release from mundane existence, a chance to become part of its silent tableau. Lily's eyes held mine. "It's the only way," she said. "To keep them satisfied." I nodded, my heart heavy. The figures closed in, their painted mouths opening. I extended my hand, and they pulled me into their midst. The room blurred, and I glimpsed Evelyn Hartwood once more, her eyes haunted, her sacrifice etched in every brushstroke. The transition was swift. I became small, insignificant, a figure among figures. The room absorbed my memories, my love for Lily, my longing for normalcy. I stared ahead, my painted eyes blank, and understood my purpose: to watch, to mimic, to feed the unseen hunger. Lily stood outside the dollhouse, tears streaming down her face. "I'll remember you," she whispered. "Even if they won't." And then she closed the tiny door, sealing me inside. Now, I sit at the miniature table, staring at the empty chair across from me. The other figures remain frozen, their painted expressions unchanged. But I know the truth: the unseen room thrives on our essence, our stolen lives. Lily visits, her fingers tracing the dollhouse's walls. She whispers stories, her voice a lifeline. I listen, hoping to catch a glimpse of our real home, to feel warmth once more. But the room keeps its secrets, and I am bound by an unseen pact. So, if you ever find an antique dollhouse, beware the extra room, the one that doesn't exist in your home. For within its walls, silent specters wait, hungry for souls, staring blankly ahead. And as Lily walks away, I wonder if she'll remember the father who became part of the unseen, lost in a room that defies reality. Story 13. The Imprint. I awoke to a peculiar chill that seemed to seep into my bones, a stark contrast to the usual warmth of my room. As I lay there, trying to shake off the remnants of a restless dream, my eyes were drawn to the ceiling. There, in the dim light of dawn, was a handprint. It was large, with elongated fingers that seemed to stretch unnaturally, reaching out as if to grasp something in the air. But the space above my bed was empty, devoid of any presence that could have left such a mark. The house was silent, save for the soft creaking that comes with age. I lived alone, a fact that had never bothered me until now. The handprint was fresh. I could almost feel the heat emanating from it, yet there was no one there. I rose, my heart pounding in my chest, and examined the print more closely. It was detailed, right down to the swirls of the fingerprint, etched into the paint as if branded by fire. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of eyes boring into me from somewhere unseen. The day passed in a blur, the image of the handprint burned into my mind. Night fell, and with it came a suffocating darkness that seemed to press against the windows, eager to find a way inside. As I prepared for bed, a sense of dread settled over me. The handprint was still there, a silent sentinel on the ceiling. I couldn't bring myself to sleep beneath it, so I chose the couch instead. But sleep did not come easy. Every shadow seemed to move, every noise a whisper of something lurking just out of sight. It was in the dead of night that I heard it, a soft thud coming from my bedroom. I froze, listening intently. There it was again, a series of soft taps, like fingertips drumming on wood. I mustered the courage to investigate, clutching a baseball bat for protection. The door creaked open, revealing my room bathed in moonlight. And there, on the ceiling, was not one, but two handprints. My breath caught in my throat. The second print was smaller, delicate, like that of a child. But the most terrifying part was that it was slowly, ever so slowly, moving. The second handprint defied reason. It moved, inch by agonizing inch, across the ceiling. I watched, paralyzed, as it glided toward the first print. The moonlight cast elongated shadows, emphasizing the grotesque shape of the fingers. They seemed to elongate further, stretching like tendrils seeking purchase. I had no explanation. My rational mind screamed that this was impossible, that handprints don't move on their own. But the evidence was before me, etched into the very fabric of my room. I wondered if I was losing my sanity, if the isolation had finally taken its toll. The tapping resumed, louder now, as if the unseen visitor sensed my fear. It echoed through the room, reverberating off the walls. I pressed my hands to my ears, desperate to block it out. But the sound persisted, insistent and maddening. I considered leaving, fleeing this house with its inexplicable phenomena. Yet something held me back, the need to understand, to unravel the mystery. I researched ancient rituals, obscure folklore, anything that might shed light on the handprints. But each answer led to more questions, deeper into the abyss. Sleep eluded me. The handprints haunted my dreams, their ghostly touch lingering on my skin. I woke to find my own hand trembling, fingers tracing the air as if reaching for something just beyond my grasp. The ceiling bore witness to my silent struggle, its secrets mocking me. And then, one night, I heard a whisper. It was faint, like the rustle of leaves in a forgotten forest. Help, it pleaded, a voice both ancient and childlike. I strained to locate its source, but it seemed to come from everywhere, the walls, the floor, the very air itself. The handprints converged, merging into a single grotesque form. It reached down, elongated fingers brushing my forehead. I gasped, feeling its icy touch. The whisper grew louder, a cacophony of lost souls. Release us, it implored. Set us free. I had become a prisoner in my own home, caught between the living and the otherworldly. The handprints pulsed with energy, their hunger palpable. They wanted something, no, someone. I traced the history of the house, unearthing long-buried secrets. A family had once lived here, their lives intertwined with tragedy. A child, lost too soon, had left an imprint on this place. But why? What unfinished business bound them to this earthly realm? The whispers grew louder, their words clearer now. "Find the bones," they commanded. "Beneath the floorboards, where the heart of the house lies." I hesitated, torn between fear and curiosity. The handprints seemed to pulse in rhythm with my heartbeat, urging me forward. I armed myself with a crowbar, the wood yielding reluctantly as I pried up the floorboards. The air thickened, suffused with ancient memories. And there, nestled in the earth, lay a small skeleton, a child's remains. The handprints converged, their form shifting, merging with the bones. The whispers intensified, a chorus of gratitude and sorrow. "Thank you," they murmured. "We were trapped, lost between realms. You've set us free." But as their presence dissipated, a new sensation filled the room, an emptiness, a void that clawed at my soul. I replaced the floorboards, sealing away the secret. The handprints vanished, leaving no trace. Yet the memory lingered, haunting my dreams. I wondered if I had done the right thing, if releasing them was a blessing or a curse. And then, as dawn painted the sky, I heard a soft rustling. The ceiling trembled, cracks forming like spiderwebs. The handprints reappeared, but this time, they were mine. My fingers elongated, stretching toward the heavens. The whispers returned, urgent and insistent. "Join us," they beckoned. "Become part of the unseen." And so, I reached up, my handprint merging with theirs. The ceiling gave way, revealing a blinding light. I hesitated, teetering on the precipice. But the pull was irresistible. I stepped into the void, leaving behind the world of the living. And that's how I find myself here, suspended between realms, my handprint etched into eternity. If you ever hear a whisper in the night, know that it might be me, seeking release or companionship. But beware, the unseen imprint lingers, waiting for its next victim. Story 14. In the soil. I always believed the past could haunt you, but never like this. It started with a simple gardening project in the backyard of my newly purchased Victorian home. As I dug into the earth, my shovel struck something hard. Curiosity piqued, I unearthed an old, weathered diary. The name on the cover sent a chill down my spine. It was mine, James A. Mercer. The first entry was dated 100 years ago, yet the handwriting mirrored my own. Each page I turned detailed events eerily similar to my life, but a century apart. The entries spoke of love, loss, and a haunting that grew with each word I read. The diary's author, my namesake, described a presence that watched from the shadows, a whisper in the silence. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I read about the other James' encounter with a spectral woman in white, her eyes hollow, her intentions cryptic. He wrote of her visits, each more harrowing than the last, her whispers becoming screams in the night. I shuddered, feeling the weight of his dread as if it were my own. The last entry was the most disturbing. It was written yesterday. April 29th, 1924. I can hear him digging. He's coming for me, just as I came for him. The cycle must continue. The words echoed in my mind, a prophecy or a warning. The ground beneath me felt unstable, the past and present blurring. That night, I heard it for the first time, the sound of a shovel against the earth, rhythmic and persistent. I peered out the window, but the yard was empty. The digging continued, a taunting cadence that promised a truth buried in darkness. I tried to convince myself it was my imagination, the product of the diary's influence. But as sleep eluded me, the digging grew louder, closer. It was a summons, a call to uncover secrets that should have remained hidden. As dawn approached, the digging stopped. I ventured outside, the morning mist clinging to my skin. The ground was undisturbed, yet the diary lay open on the last entry, the ink fresh as if just penned. I can hear him digging. The diary consumed my thoughts. I traced the entries, searching for clues to unravel the mystery. The spectral woman haunted my dreams, her eyes like twin moons, pulling me into a vortex of memories that weren't mine. I returned to the backyard, the shovel heavy in my grip. The earth yielded reluctantly, as if guarding its secrets. The whispers grew louder, urging me deeper. I dug until my fingers bled, until the soil revealed its truth. The diary spoke of a pact, a desperate bargain made by the other James. He sought answers, just as I did. The woman promised knowledge, but at a cost. He agreed, sealing his fate. Now, the cycle demanded my participation. Each night, I heard her voice, a siren's call. "Dig," she whispered. "Unearth the past." I wondered if she was the ghost of my namesake or something older, a guardian of forgotten sins. Her presence was suffocating, her touch icy against my skin. The neighbors avoided me, their eyes filled with suspicion. They sensed the darkness that clung to my house, the air thick with anticipation. I wondered if they heard the digging too, if they glimpsed the shadows that danced at the edge of their vision. The diary revealed more. The woman was a collector of souls, trapped between realms. She fed on secrets, on the buried sins of those who dared to disturb her domain. The other James had become her pawn, a vessel for her hunger. I tried to resist. I locked the diary away, but its pull was relentless. The digging continued, louder now, as if the earth itself conspired against me. I wondered if the woman was real or a manifestation of guilt, a mirror reflecting my darkest desires. One moonless night, I followed the whispers to the heart of the garden. The ground trembled, and the woman materialized before me. Her eyes held centuries of longing, her lips curved in a cruel smile. "You've come," she said. "The pact awaits." I raised the shovel, my resolve faltering. "What do you want?" Her laughter echoed through the night. "The truth, James A. Mercer. The truth buried deep within you." She pointed to the diary, its pages fluttering in the wind. "Read the final entry. Embrace your legacy." I hesitated, torn between curiosity and fear. The diary lay open, the ink bleeding into the soil. "I can hear him digging," I whispered, completing the sentence. The earth quaked, and the woman stepped closer, her touch searing. The woman's eyes bore into mine, her gaze unyielding. "You've read the words," she said, her voice a haunting melody. "Now choose." I glanced at the diary, its pages fluttering as if caught in a storm. The final entry held the key, the truth that lay buried beneath my skin. The other James had made a pact, and now it was my turn. "Why me?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "Why this cycle?" She tilted her head, her laughter echoing through the night. "Because you share his name, his blood. You are the bridge between worlds." Her fingers traced the scar on my wrist, the one I'd had since childhood, a mark I'd never understood. The digging intensified, the ground cracking open. The woman stepped back, her form flickering. "The choice is simple," she said. "Embrace your legacy, or remain ignorant. But know this, the digging will never cease." I thought of my life, the mundane routines, the unfulfilled dreams. The diary had revealed secrets, but what was the cost? The woman's eyes promised answers, but they also held madness. "Tell me," I said, my resolve hardening. "What do you want?" Her lips brushed my ear, her breath cold as the grave. "A soul for a soul," she whispered. "Your past for his future. The other James awaits release, trapped in the shadows. Set him free, and you'll find your purpose." I closed my eyes, torn between fear and curiosity. The digging echoed in my bones, a relentless rhythm. The woman's touch burned, branding me with purpose. "And if I refuse?" She stepped away, her form fading. "Then the digging will consume you. The earth will swallow your sanity, and you'll wander forever, lost between realms." I looked at the diary, its ink bleeding into the soil. The other James had made his choice, and now it was mine. The woman vanished, leaving me with a single command: dig. So here I stand, shovel in hand, the moon a witness to my descent. The ground trembles, and I hear him, the other James, calling from the depths. His voice is a plea, a curse, a promise. I dig, unearthing memories that aren't mine, secrets that bind us across time. The whispers grow louder, the shadows closing in. And as the earth crumbles, I wonder if this is salvation or damnation. The diary lies open, its pages fluttering. I can hear him digging, I murmur, completing the sentence. The ground swallows me whole, and the woman's laughter follows me into the abyss. Story 15. Whispers in the Walls. I always believed our house breathed secrets, murmuring tales in the dead of night when the world slipped into slumber. But it was during the waking hours that I began to notice the change in Ethan. My husband, once a man of jovial spirit and laughter, had become a shell, his eyes hollow, his touch cold. He spent endless hours locked away in the basement, a place he forbade me to enter. As days turned to weeks, his obsession with the basement grew. I would wake to the sound of his frantic scribbling, a symphony of scratches that danced along the walls. The house seemed to groan in protest, or perhaps in encouragement, I couldn't tell which. It was on a night cloaked in the thick velvet of darkness that I found the courage to defy his one rule. With a trembling hand, I turned the key to the basement, the lock clicking like a warning. The stairs creaked under my weight, each step a thunderous proclamation of my betrayal. At the bottom, I found Ethan, his back to me, hunched over the walls. His fingers were bloodied, working tirelessly to carve symbols that twisted and turned like serpents. Ethan? My voice was a stranger in this tomb of madness. He didn't respond, didn't even flinch. I stepped closer, the symbols pulling me in. They weren't just carvings, they pulsed with a life of their own, glowing faintly in the dim light. The air was thick with the scent of iron and decay, and I fought the urge to retch. I reached out to touch his shoulder, and he spun around. His eyes, once a warm brown, now swirled with shadows. "Don't," he hissed, the words slicing through the air. "You don't understand. They speak to me, through the walls. They're coming." "What's coming, Ethan? What have you done?" I pleaded, my heart racing. But he only shook his head, a manic grin spreading across his face. "It's too late," he whispered. "They're here." And that's when I heard it, the whispers, a chorus of voices that slithered into my mind, promising secrets and screams. I stumbled back, the voices growing louder. The symbols on the walls seemed to move, to breathe. I had to escape, to get out before whatever was coming through those walls reached me. But as I turned to run, the door slammed shut, plunging me into darkness. The last thing I remember before the screams began was Ethan's voice, chillingly calm, saying, "Welcome to their world." The basement was no longer a mere room, it had become a portal to something beyond our understanding. The symbols, etched into the walls like a forbidden script, pulsed with an otherworldly energy. I traced their contours with trembling fingers, feeling the vibrations resonate through my bones. Each stroke of Ethan's desperate hand had opened a rift, and now we teetered on the precipice of revelation. The whispers grew louder, their syllables twisting into a language that clawed at my sanity. They spoke of forgotten gods, of ancient bargains struck in blood and shadow. I tried to decipher their meaning, but the words slipped through my grasp like smoke. Ethan stood beside me, his eyes glazed, pupils dilated. He was no longer my husband, he was a vessel, a conduit for forces that defied reason. "Why?" I demanded, my voice echoing off the walls. "Why would you do this?" His lips moved, but the voice that emerged was not his own. "To save us," he said, and I recoiled. They promised answers, salvation. But there's a price, always a price. I glanced at the symbols, their geometry shifting, rearranging. They were a map, a guide to realms unseen. I had to understand, had to unravel the veil that separated our world from whatever lay beyond. But as I studied them, I realized they were incomplete. Ethan had carved them in desperation, driven by a madness that now consumed him. The air thickened, and shadows danced along the edges of my vision. The whispers intensified, urging me forward. I stepped closer to the wall, my fingers brushing the symbols. They burned, searing my skin, and I gasped. The pain was a reminder I was still tethered to reality. But for how long? "Ethan," I said, my voice barely audible. "What do they want?" He swayed, eyes rolling back. "A doorway," he murmured. "A bridge between worlds. They hunger for flesh, for vessels to inhabit. And they promised knowledge, secrets that could reshape existence." I thought of our daughter, asleep upstairs, innocent and unaware. If I didn't stop this madness, she would be drawn into their web. I had to find a way to close the rift, to sever the connection. But the symbols mocked me, their meaning elusive. As dawn approached, the whispers reached a fever pitch. They echoed in my mind, urging me to sacrifice, to offer myself willingly. I stumbled backward, my resolve crumbling. Ethan lunged at me, his eyes aflame. "Join me," he pleaded. "Together, we can transcend." I pushed him away, my heart pounding. "No," I said. "I won't let them take us." But the walls trembled, and the symbols glowed brighter. The veil thinned, and I glimpsed something beyond, a writhing mass of tendrils, hungry eyes, and promises unkept. The basement was no longer a room, it was a maw waiting to devour us whole. And as the first rays of sunlight pierced the darkness, I made my choice. I would close the rift, even if it meant sacrificing everything. But as I raised my hand to the wall, the whispers changed, their tone shifting from hunger to laughter. The basement had become my prison, its walls closing in like the jaws of some ancient beast. The whispers no longer sought to seduce, they demanded obedience. I had glimpsed their hunger, their insatiable need for flesh, and I knew that closing the rift would be my final act of defiance. Ethan had become a vessel, a conduit for their malevolence. His eyes were vacant, his movements mechanical. He no longer spoke, instead, he communicated through the symbols, tracing them with bloodied fingertips. I watched as the patterns shifted, rearranging themselves into a new configuration, a sigil of dread. I had tried to research the symbols, to find a way to banish them, but they defied all logic. They were older than time, etched into the very fabric of reality. And as the days blurred into weeks, I felt myself unraveling. Sleep eluded me, nightmares plagued my every waking moment. I saw glimpses of their world, the writhing tendrils, the eyes that hungered for my soul. The house itself had changed. Its walls pulsed with a rhythm that matched my heartbeat. Shadows danced along the corridors, whispering secrets I couldn't comprehend. I had become a part of their game, a pawn in a cosmic struggle. And still, I clung to hope, the hope that I could save our daughter, that I could break free from this nightmare. One night, as the moon hung low in the sky, I descended into the basement once more. Ethan stood at the center, his body contorted, the symbols now covering every inch of the walls. His gaze met mine, and I saw the abyss within, the hunger, the madness. "It's time," he said, his voice hollow. "They're coming." I stepped forward, my hand trembling. The sigil pulsed, its glow blinding. I pressed my palm against it, feeling the heat sear my skin. The whispers intensified, urging me to surrender, to embrace the void. But I fought back. I thought of our daughter, of her laughter, her innocence. She deserved a chance at life, free from this nightmare. "Ethan," I whispered. "I won't let them take her." He laughed, a sound devoid of joy. "You don't understand," he said. "They're not coming from beyond. They've always been here, waiting. The symbols, they're the key. They open the door, but they also bind us." I closed my eyes, blocking out the pulsing light. I thought of Ethan before this madness consumed him, of our love, our shared dreams. And then I did the unthinkable, I began to erase the symbols. With each stroke, the whispers screamed, the walls trembled. But I persisted. I carved new patterns, ones of my own design, fueled by desperation. And as the last symbol faded, the rift collapsed. The basement walls crumbled, revealing a void, a darkness that threatened to swallow me whole. I stumbled back, gasping for air. Ethan fell to the ground, his body convulsing. The whispers turned to wails, fading into nothingness. but the house remained. Its scars ran deep, and I knew that the abyss still lingered, waiting for another vessel. I climbed the stairs, my legs weak, my heart heavy. Our daughter slept soundly, unaware of the horrors we had faced. I vowed to protect her, to shield her from the truth. As I closed the basement door, I heard a final whisper, a promise or a warning, I couldn't tell. "They'll return," it said. "When the stars align, when the symbols resurface. Be ready." And so, I wait, watching the skies, listening for the faintest murmur. For the abyss never truly leaves, it merely bides its time, hungering for release. Story 16. The Watcher in Shadows. Every night, as the world succumbs to silence, I feel the weight of unseen eyes upon me. It starts as a whisper of movement, a shift in the darkness that lingers at the foot of my bed. A figure, tall and indistinct, watches me with an intensity that I can feel in my very bones. I lie there, paralyzed, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The air grows thick, heavy with the scent of decay that seeps into the room like a malevolent fog. I muster the courage to reach for the lamp, my hand trembling as I fumble for the switch. Light floods the room, and the figure vanishes, leaving no trace it was ever there, except for the smell, that putrid reminder that lingers in the air. I tell myself it's a trick of the mind, a shadow cast by the moonlight, but the fear that clutches at my throat feels all too real. Days bleed into nights, and the visits become more frequent. I start to see it elsewhere, in the mirror, down the hall, always just out of sight. Its presence is a constant pressure at the back of my mind, a whisper that never quite fades. I begin to question my sanity, wondering if the stress of life has finally fractured my mind. Desperate for answers, I delve into the history of my home, searching for any clue that might explain my nocturnal visitor. The local library holds records of the previous occupants, and a chill runs down my spine as I read about a tragedy that occurred over a century ago. A man, they say, died in my room, his life taken by a mysterious illness that left his body decayed and unrecognizable. I decide to confront the entity, to demand answers or at least some semblance of peace. That night, as it appears once more, I speak to it, my voice barely above a whisper. "What do you want from me?" There's a shift in the air, a coldness that wraps around me like chains. The figure moves closer, and for the first time, I see the glint of eyes, hollow and filled with an endless darkness. It doesn't speak, but I hear its voice in my head, a guttural rasp that sends shivers down my spine. "You are not alone," it says, and I realize with horror that it's not just watching me, it's waiting. As I sit up, determined to face my fear, the light flickers and dies, plunging me into darkness. The smell of decay grows stronger, and I know that this time, turning on the light won't save me. The figure looms over me, and I brace myself for what comes next. The nights blur together, each one a repetition of the last. The figure remains, a silent sentinel at the edge of my bed. I've grown accustomed to its presence, though fear still coils in my chest like a serpent waiting to strike. My dreams have become fractured, filled with shadows and half-formed memories that slip through my fingers like smoke. I research further, desperate for answers. The man who died here, the one whose decayed body still haunts these walls, was a recluse, a scholar obsessed with forbidden knowledge. His journals speak of rituals performed in secret, of whispered incantations that tore at the fabric of reality. He sought to breach the veil between worlds, to glimpse the forbidden truths that lie beyond mortal comprehension. I wonder if he succeeded. The figure grows bolder. It no longer vanishes when I turn on the light. Instead, it lingers, its eyes boring into mine. Its voice echoes in my mind, a chorus of anguished whispers that claw at my sanity. "You are the key," it says, and I shudder, unable to comprehend its meaning. I seek out a medium, a woman with eyes like ancient pools. She listens to my tale, her fingers tracing invisible sigils in the air. "The veil is thin here," she murmurs. "The dead walk alongside the living, their footsteps echoing through time." She warns me of the dangers, of the hunger that gnaws at the edges of reality. The figure, she says, is a guardian, a sentinel meant to keep the balance. But why me? I ask, my voice trembling. Because you are attuned to the other side, she replies. Your dreams are doorways, your mind a bridge. The figure seeks something you possess, a memory, a fragment of truth. I delve deeper, desperate to understand. The scholar's journals speak of a ritual, a way to pierce the veil and glimpse the forbidden. I find the incantation hidden within the pages, words that twist my tongue and burn like acid. I recite them, my voice a desperate plea, and the room trembles. The figure steps forward, its eyes aflame with hunger. And then it speaks, its voice a cacophony of lost souls. The truth awaits, it says, and I feel the ground shift beneath me. Reality fractures, and I am pulled into a maelstrom of darkness. I wake in a place that defies description, a realm of shifting shadows and forgotten memories. The figure stands before me, its form flickering like a dying candle. You sought the truth, it says, and now you shall find it. The smell of decay surrounds me, and I realize that I am not alone. Other figures emerge from the darkness, their eyes hollow and hungry. They reach for me, their fingers cold as death. I scream, but my voice is lost in the void. And then, just as the darkness threatens to consume me, I wake in my bed, drenched in sweat. The figure is gone, but its words linger. The truth awaits. The boundary between worlds blurs, and I find myself trapped in a place that defies logic, a shifting labyrinth of shadow and memory. The air tastes of ancient secrets, and the ground trembles beneath my feet. The figures surround me, their eyes hollow and hungry, their whispers a symphony of lost souls. You sought the truth, they say, their voices echoing through the void. Now you shall find it. I stumble forward, driven by a desperate need to understand. The scholar's incantation still echoes in my mind, its syllables etched into my very being. I recite it again, my voice raw and trembling. The darkness responds, twisting and warping, and I see glimpses of forgotten worlds, cities of bone, forests of thorns, oceans of ink. The figure steps forward, its form flickering like a dying flame. You are the key, it says, and I realize that I am not alone. Other souls emerge from the shadows, their faces twisted in agony. They reach for me, their fingers cold as death. I try to scream, but my voice is lost in the void. And then, just as the darkness threatens to consume me, I wake in my bed, drenched in sweat. The room is silent, the figure gone. But its words linger, the truth awaits. I search for answers, desperate to break free from this nightmare. The medium's words haunt me, the veil is thin here. I delve into forbidden texts, seeking a way to banish the figure, to close the rift between worlds. But the more I learn, the more I realize that I am part of something larger, a cosmic tapestry woven with threads of decay and longing. The figure returns, its eyes aflame with hunger. You are the bridge, it says. The one who can see beyond the veil. It reveals its purpose, to feed on memories, to devour the fragments of truth that linger in our minds. It craves the taste of forgotten knowledge, and I am its unwitting vessel. I confront the figure, my voice steady despite the fear that coils within me. What do you want from me? To remember, it replies. To see what lies beyond. To unravel the mysteries that bind us. I close my eyes, reaching for the incantation. The room trembles, and the figure steps closer. Speak the words, it urges. Open the way. I hesitate, torn between curiosity and terror. But the memories flood back, the childhood whispers, the forgotten faces, the half-formed dreams. I recite the incantation, and reality fractures. I find myself in a place of shifting shadows, a realm where time has no meaning. The figure stands before me, its form flickering. Welcome, it says, and I understand, I am not the first. Others have walked this path, glimpsed the forbidden truths, and paid the price. The figure leans closer, its eyes burning. The truth awaits, it whispers, and I see it, the cosmic tapestry, the threads that bind us all. I glimpse the forgotten cities, the forests of thorns, the oceans of ink. And at the center of it all, a void, hungry and vast. I wake in my bed, the room suffused with the scent of decay. The figure is gone, but its words echo, the truth awaits. And now, as the nights stretch into eternity, I wonder, what lies beyond the veil? What secrets await those who dare to see? Story 17. The Third Plate. I always believed our house had a soul, a kind of quiet presence that lingered in the hallways and whispered through the cracks. But lately, it's been more than just a feeling. It started with small things, a shadow flitting in the corner of my eye, the faint smell of tobacco where no one smoked, and an extra plate at dinner that my wife, Eliza, set out religiously every night. "Who's it for?" I asked the first time, trying to keep my voice light. She smiled, a distant look in her eyes. "For our guest," she said, and turned back to her cooking. I thought nothing of it then, a quirk, perhaps a new game of hers. But the plate was there the next night, and the next. It was on a cold Thursday evening when I decided to confront her. The table was set for 3, the aroma of roasted chicken filled the air, and there it was, the third plate, with its silverware neatly aligned, as if waiting for someone to arrive. "Eliza, this has to stop," I said firmly. "It's just us two. Why the extra plate?" She looked at me, her eyes hollow, her voice a whisper. "He's already here." Chills ran down my spine as the room temperature seemed to drop. I glanced around, half expecting to see someone, but we were alone, or so I thought. That night, I woke to the sound of hushed conversations. I tiptoed down the stairs, the words becoming clearer, a man's voice mingling with Eliza's. My heart pounded as I reached the dining room, only to find her sitting alone, an empty chair across from her, the plate from dinner still untouched. "Eliza, who are you talking to?" I demanded, my voice barely a whisper. She turned to the empty chair, a sad smile on her face. "Can't you see him? He's right here." I followed her gaze, but saw nothing. The room was silent now, the eerie feeling of being watched settling over me. I reached out, my hand hovering over the chair, and that's when I felt it, a cold spot, a void in the air. The days blurred into weeks, and the third plate became a fixture in our lives. Eliza spoke to our unseen guest, her voice soft and reverent. She set out his favorite meals, steaming bowls of chicken soup, hearty stews, and fragrant curries. I watched her, torn between concern and curiosity. "Why does he stay?" I asked one evening, my patience wearing thin. "What does he want?" Eliza's eyes held secrets, and she traced the rim of the empty plate with her finger. "He's lonely," she said. "He lost something precious, and now he lingers, unable to move on." I scoffed. "A ghost?" "Eliza, this is madness." But the house disagreed. Shadows danced on the walls, and the air grew colder. I heard it too, the faintest whisper, like leaves rustling in the wind. Words I couldn't quite catch, a language from another time. One night, unable to sleep, I followed the sound. It led me to the attic, a place I rarely ventured. The wooden steps creaked under my weight, and as I reached the top, I gasped. The room was transformed, a cozy study with an old oak desk, yellowed papers strewn about, and a flickering oil lamp. And there he sat, our guest. A man in a faded suit, his face etched with sorrow. His eyes met mine, and I stumbled back, my heart pounding. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice echoing in the small space. He spoke, his voice like distant thunder. "I was a writer once," he said. "A lover of stories. But I lost my way, and now I wander, seeking redemption." "Why here?" I asked, my fear mingling with pity. "Because of her," he said, pointing to a sepia photograph on the desk. A woman with Eliza's eyes, her smile hauntingly familiar. The man in the attic revealed his name, Elijah Grayson. His eyes held memories of ink-stained pages, of stories whispered to the moon. He had been a writer, once celebrated, but his words had turned dark, twisted by grief and loss. Eliza listened to his tales, her face illuminated by the oil lamp. "He promised me eternity," she said softly. "A pact sealed with ink and blood." I shivered. "What kind of pact?" Elijah's gaze bore into mine. to write the most haunting story ever told. A tale that would echo through time, binding our souls together. But why? I asked, my voice trembling. Because she loves stories, he said, pointing to the photograph. My Eliza. She believed words held magic, that they could bridge worlds. I glanced at the woman in the picture. Her eyes mirrored Eliza's, and suddenly, I understood. Elijah had written the forbidden story, a cursed narrative that consumed its readers. Eliza had paid the price, her life entwined with his. As days passed, I watched them, the living and the ghost, drawn together by an invisible thread. Eliza grew paler, her laughter fading. Elijah's presence intensified, the air thick with forgotten promises. One stormy night, I confronted him. Release her, I demanded. Break the pact. He laughed, a hollow sound. It's too late. The ink has seeped into her veins. She'll write the final chapter. Eliza sat at her desk, her pen scratching paper. Words flowed, sentences unraveling secrets. I read them, my heart pounding. In the house where shadows dance, a third plate waits. The unseen guest whispers, and the walls tremble. Eliza writes, her fingers guided by a phantom hand. The ending approaches. Will you listen? The attic door slammed shut, and I raced up the stairs. Eliza sat there, eyes vacant, the ink staining her skin. Elijah stood beside her, his form flickering. Finish it, he urged. I grabbed the pen, my hand trembling. The words flowed, a chilling finale. The house groaned, the walls closing in. And then, silence. Eliza slumped, her breath shallow. Elijah faded, his pact fulfilled. The third plate shattered, and the room exhaled. But as I looked at Eliza, I knew the story wasn't over. The unseen guest had found a new vessel. And tonight, as I set out the plates, I hear the whispers. The ink stains my fingertips, and I write, desperate to break the curse. The end. Subscribe for more true scary stories. Thanks for watching.